began to reassert itself. Party insurgency. The issue that most divided the progressive and conservative wings of the Republican Party was the tariff. It was generally agreed that the rates set by the Dingley tariff had to be lowered, but progressive wanted deep cuts, especially in those products produced by the large trusts. Taft eventually sided with the conservatives, who passed the Payne-Aldrich Act of 1909. The progressive broke with Taft and began to look forward to electing Roosevelt in 1912. The Ballinger-Pinchot Affair. Taft further antagonized progressives and Roosevelt when he fired Clifford Pinchot, a leading conservationist, because of his insubordination towards Secretary of the Interior Richard Ballinger, whom Pinchot accused of selling public lands to friends. Taft alienates the progressives. Even when Taft attempted to support progressive measures, such as his successful effort to strengthen the ICC by the Mann-Elkins Act of 1910, he found himself deserted by the progressives whenever he had to make an even minor concessions for conservative votes. In 1910 congressional elections, Taft attacked the progressives, weakening the entire Republican Party and allowing the Democrats to gain control of Congress. Taft worked well with the Democratic Congress. Together, they passed legislation protecting labor and creating an income tax, the 16th Amendment. Taft also pushed ahead with an antitrust suit, including one against a merger that Roosevelt had approved. Roosevelt and Taft began to attack one another publicly, and in 1912, Roosevelt announced his candidacy for president. Differing philosophies in the election of 1912. Although Taft was nominated by the Republican Party, he had no chance of victory. Roosevelt ran as a candidate of the Progressives, or the Bull Moose Party, and Woodrow Wilson was nominated by the Democrats. Roosevelt campaigned on the promise of a new nationalism in which the federal government would actively regulate and stimulate the economy, and in which wasteful competition would be replaced by efficiency. Wilson promised a new freedom in which big business and the government would be restrained so that the individual could forge ahead on his own. Because the Republican vote was divided, the Democrats won both White House and Capitol Hill. Woodrow Wilson's new freedom. Woodrow Wilson reached the White House through an academic rather than a political career. He had been a history professor and a president of Princeton University before being elected governor of New Jersey. A progressive, an intellectual, stubborn and self-righteous, and an inspiring orator. Wilson was one of America's most effective presidents, according to the author. The New Freedom in Action. Wilson led Congress in the passage of several important measures. The Underwood Tariff of 1913 cut duties substantially. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 reformed the banking system and gave the United States a stable but flexible currency. And the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914 outlawed unfair trade practices and limited the use of court injunctions against labor unions, and the Federal Trade Commission was established in 1914 to supervise businesses. With this much accomplished, Wilson abruptly announced that the new freedom had been achieved in 1914. That's November of 1914. Wilson moves towards new nationalism. Wilson retreated from the reform because he was distracted by the outbreak of war in Europe. Because he needed conservative Southern support, and because the Republicans seemed to make gains by attacking Wilson's programs, in 1916, Wilson, who wished to be reelected again, pushed progressive reforms. He succeeded in helping farmers with the Federal Farm Loan Act, and he intervened in strikes on the side of workers. He tried to ban child labor. He increased income tax on the rich, and he gave his support to female suffrage. In blending elements of the new freedom with elements of new nationalism, Wilson adopted a pragmatic approach to reform and won a close election in 1916. Though the Progressives were extremely successful in some respects, regulatory commissions, child labor laws, direct primaries, and city improvements, there were many social problems that they did not solve. Some problems like race they failed even to address. Despite this, the actions of Roosevelt and Wilson significantly expanded the powers of the presidency, and government at all levels began to accept the responsibility for the welfare of society. The onset of World War I, however, cut short the progressive spirit of reform.